students of ENG 145. This is a brief introduction guide to chapter 1 of Fromkin, our textbook, as you can see. Today I'm just going to cover the brief sound systems, the introduction of what is language, which sounds simple but is actually quite complicated. If you look at the chapter 1 here, you'll see we're going to cover knowledge of sound systems, knowledge of words, the arbitrary relation of form and meaning. Arbitrary means oftentimes unrelated or contradictory or even opposite. The creation of linguistic knowledge, sentences, non-sentences, linguistic knowledge, and performance. Okay, we're going to cover those very briefly in chapter 1. I would like you to read through chapter 1 on your own, in addition to watching or listening to this clip. Okay, let's get started. The concept of what is, the concept of what is language. We'll try and do that before my battery runs out. The concept of what is language is quite a complex one. Some people, if they ask you what is language, you might say, it's something that we use to communicate. And you'd be right, but what is language is a quite complicated concept, because even as a linguist, we struggle to define what language is. And we've been studying it for decades, probably even longer. Okay. But you cannot talk about language in any context where it isn't used to communicate something, whether it's verbal or non-verbal. Maybe it's a look that your mom gives you when she's upset with you, but some form of communication is going, and it is definitely a kind of language, right? So many people use language in many situations. You are listening now, I'm communicating via a language, which is English. When you are at the store, you use language. When you are with your lover, you use language. When you are angry, you use language. So language is very important in all our contexts in which we find ourselves. I'm going to just be briefly describing what's going on in our chapter 1 that I want you to read through. Linguistic knowledge. For example, it says, when you know a language, you can speak and be understood by others who also know the language, right? This means you are able to produce strings of sounds that signify certain meanings and to understand or interpret the sounds produced by others. So in other words, you can produce sounds that make words, and these words are understood by other people who are listening to the sounds that you are making, right? For example, they give you the example of a Viking queen, right? Or a child named after a Viking queen. And in the beginning, children cannot be able to understand all languages except the language they're born in. So if you're born in a Zulu context or an English context or a Xhosa context or a French context, children will eventually end up speaking that particular language, right? And they will understand the knowledge of the sounds that are associated with that language, right? So we know that some sounds produced a certain way sound like a certain language. So French, like quel âge avez-vous? How old are you? Right? In French, we know that it sounds French. Sometimes we may not know what it means, but we know what it sounds like. Or Auf Wiedersehen is German for goodbye, right? Or you hear another language, and just by listening to the way it sounds, you can guess what language it is, right? We call that linguistic knowledge. So I want you to go through and read read through the chapter slowly, carefully. It's very self-explanatory, but I just want to quickly cover some stuff with you. Right, the knowledge of words. We know that some words have certain meaning. Right, for example, boy, toy, right, or pterodactyl, which is a giant dinosaur bird that used to exist a while ago. It's now extinct, thankfully. Very scary animal. If you want to see what it looks like, watch Jurassic World. So we have a knowledge of words that this allows us to speak a language, right? And when you put together a certain configuration of words, it makes a sentence. When you put together a configuration of sounds, it makes a word, right? Now, while we're talking about words, let's look at the arbitrary relation of form and meaning, right? So, for example, the letters that they used here, right? House signifies a house. Let's say ice cream. Okay, if I say ice cream, immediately you're thinking, whatever your favorite ice cream is, Baskin Robbins, Haagen-Dazs, Tom and Jerry, Ben and Jerry's, whatever your favorite brand of ice cream, Ola ice cream, is you are thinking about that, right? So when I say ice cream, in your mind, the concept of ice cream comes up, right? So it's sweet, it's creamy, there are different flavors. There are different flavors and so on. So, but the word ice cream has no direct link to the actual concept, right? So, in other words, it has an arbitrary relationship. The sounds that mean ice cream are not directly related to it, right? So, for example, they give you, again, the hand, right? But in different languages, it means different things. So, what is the Afrikaans word for house, right? It's huis, I think, and in French it's maison, right? In Russian, dom, in Spanish, casa. So all of these words signify house, but they have no direct link to house. So you'll notice that language has a arbitrary relationship. The word and the concept are oftentimes not related. It just refers to that, right? So the form, which is the sound, and the meaning, which is the concept of a word, also works for sign languages, right? The sign, for example, the middle finger. When you give someone a middle finger on the road while you're driving, is not necessarily the action, but it's the action signified by the middle finger. Okay. Just want to move on. I want you to keep reading through all of these. So some sentences we know, right? Like take a look at the following. John kissed the old lady who owned the shaggy dog, right? These sentences are grammatical or ungrammatical, right? So, for example, who owned the shaggy dog John kissed the little old lady? Just by reading through all of these, you can see which ones are grammatical and which ones are not grammatical. Now, of course, it assumes that you understand a bit of the language, right? Just moving on to the linguistic competence, right? Please make sure you know these little parts here that are, you'll see they are, for example, linguistic competence. Let me just take that, doesn't work. Make sure you know the bold words, right? For example, linguistic competence is our knowledge of words and grammar, right? And our production and comprehension is our linguistic performance, and so on and so on. Okay, so I want you to read through chapter 1, and I want you to go through the concepts of language, of sound symbolism. Read through very carefully, very slowly. Make sure you understand the relationship of form and meaning, that they are not related. And so this concludes our introduction to language. Now, language can also be very creative, right? That's the whole point. You have creative language and you have academic language. Academic language is boring, it's dry, it's formal. Creative language is exciting. It's creative. It makes you think about things in a new way, right? So this semester, we'll be looking at the technical aspects of language. Before I close this video clip and you go ahead and start reading chapter 1, I just want to go over very, very briefly. I will return to this later, but I want to go over the sound systems. Just going back here. Okay, so these are the vowels, right? Now this is based on American English, so we're not going to study this particular structure of sound. We're going to look at probably the phonetic alphabet. You must learn this. Okay, this, for example, the P and the symbol. Now, oftentimes the phonetic language is the English is not written properly, right? So the way you spell fish is not the way it actually sounds. So phonetic alphabet helps us to write phonetically so that we know what a word sounds like. If you look at your dictionary, you will notice that your dictionary has the phonetic spelling along with the word. So here you can see P sound, pa, and pill, ba, bill, mill, f, feel, veal, thigh. Notice the symbols change for some of them, right? You should memorize these symbols. It is very important. These are the ones for the vowels, but mainly for the consonants at this stage. The vowels are very simple. There's a limited set, but for the consonants, you need to know, right? You need to know these. But for chapter 1 and for this week, just have a look at this and try to familiarize. You don't necessarily need to learn it, not yet, but you will in the future. So if you look at this diagram here, the way we produce sounds is according to this head diagram. This is basically us. This is what we look like if you had to split us in half. This is called your pharynx. This is your tongue. This is the oral cavity, your teeth, your lips. These are the alveolar ridge, the palate, the velum, the uvula, okay? And all of these work together to produce sound, to glottis, right? And we will be getting into detail into this. Okay, I hope we're back. We'll be getting into this into detail later. So this concludes the first introduction clip for Fromkin and Rodman. Please read through chapter 1. Thank you.